From gas pipelines to military exercises, Russia is using civilian ships to survey and spy on its Nordic neighbours, according to a new investigative documentary.
Sudan's army has accused rival forces of failing to implement an internationally brokered truce, leading to a fifth day of fighting. Austrian activists vow to bring Vienna to a standstill with fresh protests, as politicians draft a new climate protection bill.
The European Parliament takes a huge step forwards in the fight against environmental destruction, voting to ensure that products on the EU market are deforestation-free.
Russia is using civilian vessels in the Nordic Sea to survey and spy on key infrastructure. That's according to a new report produced collectively by Sweden, Denmark, Norway and Finland's national broadcasters. The team used traffic shipping data, radio communication surveillance and sources in the security services to verify the report.
Det är ju allvarligt för det visar ju på en intention att underrättelseinhämta på ett väldigt offensivt sätt och att kartlägga saker som är oerhört viktiga för Sverige och för Sveriges funktion som samhälle.
Sweden's military is aware of this kind of activity, but says it has limited legal options to react as the ships are still allowed to move freely.
Ja, men det är ju en gråzon att man kan använda civil verksamhet för att inhämta militära kunskaper. Det är någonting som vi tränar oss på att skydda oss mot. Vi noterar alltid deras närvaro och anpassar vår verksamhet efter det.
Around 50 non-military vessels are being used for Russian espionage activities. The Nordic journalist revealed that the monitored boats have sailed past oil and gas pipelines and other critical infrastructure. In some cases, boats were tracked to have sailed close to both NATO and national military exercises.
Ukrainian officials reported that Russian forces continue defensive preparations in southern Ukraine. Head of the Ukrainian Joint Coordination Press Center of the Southern Forces, Natalia Homenyuk, stated that Russian forces have mined the east bank of the Dnipro River in Kherson region in preparation for a possible Ukrainian counter-offensive. Some Russian occupation officials and mill bloggers have significantly shifted the narrative, warning of a prospective Ukrainian counter-offensive. Russian sources that previously warned about a possible Ukrainian counter-offensive in Zaporizhzhia region are now warning that Ukrainian forces may conduct a counter-offensive in Kherson region. Moscow-appointed Kherson region occupation head Vladimir Saldo claimed on the 18th of April that Ukrainian forces have concentrated unspecified forces in West Bank Kherson region and have demonstrated a willingness to cross the Dnipro River. Saldo has also issued orders to seize boats in the region from civilian owners, quote, for the needs of the Russian military. Russian mill bloggers went into greater detail on Saldo's claims, largely assessing that Ukrainian forces are preparing to establish a bridgehead across the Dnipro River. Saldo's claims coincide with Russian President Vladimir Putin's recently reported visit to the Russian rear on the Arabat Spit in Kherson region, at least 130 kilometers from nearest front line, to check Russian preparedness for a possible Ukrainian counteroffensive. The Institute for the Study of War says previously Russian mill bloggers have largely claimed that Ukrainian forces would mass for a counteroffensive in Zaporizhzhia region and warned of claimed imminent counteroffensive since October last year.
Ilya Yashin lost the appeal filed after he was sentenced in December to 8.5 years in prison for defaming the Russian army. Regarded as one of the main opposition leaders to President Vladimir Putin, Yashin was sentenced in December for spreading false information about the operation in Bucha, Ukraine, which threatened to create a negative image of the Russian armed forces, the court had ruled. A former leader of the People's Freedom Party, ally of Alexei Navalny and friend of Boris Nemetsov, Yashin was one of the few prominent opposition politicians to remain in Russia and raise his voice against the invasion of Ukraine. Yashin's hearing came a day after Evan Gershkovich lost an appeal. The Wall Street Journal reporter is charged with espionage and is awaiting trial. All this in a week that opened with the conviction of another Putin opponent. Vladimir Kara-Murza was jailed for 25 years on charges including treason.
Sudan's army has accused the Rapid Support Forces of failing to implement an internationally brokered truce, leading to more fighting for a fifth day. thousands of civilians are fleeing the capital Khartoum, now under bombs. Fighting between paramilitary forces and the regular army has left nearly 200 people dead and wounded 1,800 in just 4 days. A spokesman of the Sudanese armed forces told local media clashes have continued and a fire has been set to the Bari market in Khartoum. Of the 59 hospitals in the capital and areas in conflict, 39 are out of service.
في نقص في الكوادر نفسها وفي الأدوية وفي الأكسجين. المستشفى هسه حاليا تعاني من النقص في الحياة دي ومعظم الأطباء طلعوا يعني ما في ناس موجودين في المستشفى.
Japan will send troops to evacuate some 60 of its citizens trapped by the intense fighting.
引き続き邦人の安全確保及び退避を含め G7 をはじめとする主要各国とも緊密に連携しつつ政府として在留邦人の安全確保に全力で対応してまいります。
As people gather to break their fast during the Muslim holy month of Ramadan, the fight for power in Sudan doesn't seem to have a horizon. In Austria, the wind against so-called climate stickers is getting rougher. While parts of the government demand prison sentences for the street blockers, a leading figure from the last generation climate movement could now be deported. German-born Anja Windel has been summoned to the Foreigners Office.
Ob ich aus Österreich ausgewiesen werde, ist ja noch eine Frage der Zeit, beziehungsweise muss ich ja abwarten, ob ich da jemals einen Bescheid auch zugesteppt bekomme. Ich schätze mal eher ja, dass sie es auch probieren werden. Es ist mitunter relativ schmerzhaft, insbesondere wenn man mit der Hand in der vergangenen Zeit schon öfter geklebt hat, dann wird es mit jedem Mal ist die Hautirritation größer.
Mit einem Nagellackentferner lösen die Polizisten die Hände vom Asphalt. Seit über einem Jahr blockiert die letzte Generation Österreichs Straßen im Frühverkehr. Eine der zentralen Forderungen, ein greifendes Klimaschutzgesetz.
For more than 800 days, Austrian politicians have been negotiating a new law that would regulate CO2 limits in many parts of the country, after a previous law expired in 2020.
Ich mache mich stark für einen raschen Beschluss dieses Klimaschutzgesetzes. Es ist kein Geheimnis. Könnte ich es allein beschließen, hätten wir schon eines. Aber ich brauche dafür eine parlamentarische Mehrheit. Ich brauche dafür in einer Demokratie eine Mehrheit der Abgeordneten und an der arbeite ich hart.
The Last Generation movement has announced a wave of protests in May. For at least 3 weeks, major traffic intersections in Vienna are expected to be blocked.
The European Union is taking a huge step forwards when it comes to tackling environmental destruction, after the European Parliament voted on Wednesday to ensure that products on the EU market are deforestation-free. Companies will very soon have to prove that what they sell has no link to deforestation from 2021 onwards, both in Europe and throughout the world. The list includes, among other things, palm oil, coffee, soy and wood. The MEP in charge of the new law says the rules are a significant achievement.
We are losing every year around 10 million hectares of forests all over the world, and this instrument is going to halt that, at least our part in the complicity in that deforestation, because our shelves are currently filled with chocolate, coffee, etc., soy products that contribute massively to the forest destruction, around 10% of this 10 million yearly.
Companies will have to provide information to the relevant EU authorities, like geolocation coordinates from which satellite images of the area can be assessed for any possible forest degradation or deforestation. If they fail to comply with the rules, businesses can be fined. Critics argue that the new measures will push up the cost of goods, but the Greens in the European Parliament say this would only be in the short term.
What we try to push is to push for one economy towards another model of economy, an economy where we destroy the planet, where we destroy also conditions of life for a certain number of people, towards an economy where we do respect nature and people. And this can have, of course, a price that is felt on the consumers at start, but in a really short time, this would change how the economy is structured, and then the price wouldn't be so high for the people. It would just be somehow a transition, a shift towards another model.
Protecting the rights of indigenous people is another requirement for products entering the EU market. Once the rules come into force, businesses and traders will have 18 months to implement them, with smaller companies given longer. Christopher Pitchers for Euronews.
The Earth, Moon and Sun lined up perfectly, with the Moon covering the Sun, causing a rare type of total solar eclipse called a hybrid solar eclipse. It was seen through telescopes at the Perth Observatory and Learmonth Solar Observatory, south of Exmouth on the west coast of Australia. In the early morning of Thursday, people gathered in Australia, Indonesia and East Timor to watch the phenomenon. It occurs just a handful of times every 100 years.
Poland has commemorated the 80th anniversary of the Warsaw Jewish ghetto uprising against Nazi troops. On April 19, 1943, hundreds of Jewish people attacked the Nazis, preferring to die fighting with smuggled weapons rather than confront their death in a gas chamber. The presidents of Israel, Germany and Poland took part in a solemn ceremony, the Heroes Monument.
Ich bekenne mich zu unserer Verantwortung für die Verbrechen der Vergangenheit und zu unserer Verantwortung für eine gemeinsame Zukunft.
The Warsaw Ghetto was drawn up by the Germans 1 year after the invasion of Poland in 1939. Many starved to death due to a lack of food or through diseases. Others were deported to the Treblinka extermination camps.